said, what's the matter? He said, those bastards in the White House are going to kill that man. He said, he's one of the finest anti-communist leaders we've been working with. They're going to kill him. And they did. The next day, they assassinated the leader of a country. These things happen. Don't we know what's going on?
Well, I think people do recognize that the Warren Commission is a cover story. Our problem now is that everything is a cover story. You know, who elected Ronald Reagan? How did George Bush get to be president? How did the hostages get free? You know, how did Iran, you know, how do our allies shift from day to day depending on, who we're running guns to? Everything's a cover story on the nightly news now.
Well,
where did my bank go? You know, what SNL failed? Why can't I buy a decent airline ticket? Everything's a cover story now. That's our problem.
Excuse me. Excuse me, could I address the cover story issue? I want to ask you, Mr. Prouty, I'm just out of wild curiosity. You're talking about the cover story. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations said that there was a probable conspiracy in the John Kennedy murder and that it was probably arranged by organized crime. Are you saying that Louis Stokes and Robert Blakey, the chief counsel of the committee, were putting together a cover story for the American public?
Read it. You believe all of it?
You're saying these men of impeccable credentials and reputation have put out nothing more than a cover story to the American public?
The hardest work is to prepare the cover story. And look how good it is. It was published in 26 volumes, you know, the Warren Commission now, 26 volumes. In 1964, it became public. And those 26 volumes have been living up to today. We still have to argue whether it's true or not. And it is being perfected from day to day because it keeps up with what's happening. There's a power keeping
So now
it
Louis
going.
Stokes and Robert Blakey and the members of the committee are now part of your conspiracy then? Is that basically what you're saying? That they are now a part of this cover story?
Well,
because that'll tell, if you answer that yes, that's going to tell me a lot about everything else you've been saying about this.
For instance, how did it happen that the first writers to find fault with Oliver Stone's film, before he had put it in the theater, before he had finished the script, they worked on the first copy of the script before they even waited for the 7th copy of the script. How did it happen that the people that wrote that generally write what they call a national security column or something like that? And all of a sudden they became movie critics before the movie was even in a theater. Are we kidding ourselves? How many times do we have to say George Lardner that I used to work with when I was in the Pentagon is writing about this film, what was it, 2 months, 3 months before it came out? A pack of lies is what he wrote. Now, George Lardner's not dumb. Where does the power come from that requires a man like that with a great record to do something like that?
So you're saying George Lardner's part of the cover-up,
Where does
too?
the power come from to make a man? Where does the power come from to make a man like Earl Warren, a Chief Justice of the United States, sign his name to the Warren Commission report?
Colonel Prouty, I used to work with George Lardner. Steve Rosenfeld still does, and he's not here tonight to defend himself. We asked him to be, and he chose not to be on this panel. But I don't know that we want to accept as fact that George Lardner has written a pack of lies.
Well, his article, not George. I've known George for years. He called me before I write the story, and he wanted to know if I had any information on NSAM 263 because he heard it was going to be in the movie and he wanted to know about it. That thing has been available in books since 1963, and he wanted to know something about it.
The point is that George Lardner does not write about national security. Not that he does write about national security, but that he doesn't, and that's why he called you to ask you about that document. If he wrote about national security, he wouldn't have needed to call you.
And then, in place of that, the article that he wrote is just loaded with things that are not true. Now, why did he do that?
Are you saying he's part of the cover story too? Are you saying he's part of the cover story too then? I mean, you've just defamed 3 people here. Louis Stokes, Robert Blakey, the chief counsel of the Assassinations Committee, George Lardner, one of the finest reporters in the country, and you're saying they are all now part of this cover story, which is consistent with what you were saying in the movie, the Mr. X thing in the movie, that all of these people are part of this grand cover-up, and all of these people are part of this conspiracy against the President of the United States. I view this as being demagoguery of the worst degree, and I think that's what you're trying to portray here. You guys are grabbing at everything, taking the big pretext, and then coming down and taking any shred of evidence, regardless of its lack of merit, its sourcing, and you're applying it to this ridiculous conspiracy theory that the government of the United States arranged and executed the murder of the president.
Well, you might have been out of town when the Post published an article by ex-President Gerald Ford and David Billen of the Warren Commission report, in which they hit me very hard with an untrue statement. The Post was kind enough to print my reply that was the true report. Jerry Ford and Billen told an untruth. Now, I don't think Jerry Ford tells untruths, maybe on the golf course once in a while, or that David Billen does, a lawyer out in Des Moines. But in the case of the movie put out by Oliver Stone, they did. What's the compulsion? Why did they do that? Because the minute I wrote back to the Post, they printed my letter and corrected the untruth. The same with Tom Wicker. Times printed my letter. I mean, I'll take you up on that anytime you want. If they're publishing things that they know are untrue and their papers are going to reverse if I take the time to write to the paper, then for goodness sakes, listen to what I'm saying.
Steve Rosenfeld, briefly.
You find as further evidence of a conspiracy that a newspaper publishes promptly a reply to an attack upon you, a normal journalistic purpose.
In most cases.
I think the point is that people who bring up the documentary, you want something ridiculous, try and take the Warren Commission report and relate it to the volumes of evidence. I did. Nothing backs it up. I even found they brought somebody in from the Pentagon to write the Warren Commission report that wasn't even on the investigative staff. And when I went into the minutes, the staff critiques the report line by line. Hale Boggs and Richard Russell and John Sherman Cooper all wanted to have an alternate report, and Warren wouldn't allow it. And, you know, you can't take that evidence and put Oswald in the 6th floor window. You can't prove that he owned a gun or fired a gun that day. You can't make that gun do what was said, buy one gun in any way. And so you're left with using the evidence that they present and better evidence that's come out since. The fact that 2 guns were firing. Either you think that there were 2 lone nuts who happened to show up in Dealey Plaza on the same day at the same time with Kennedy in mind, or you have a conspiracy. Now, what that conspiracy is a deeper question, and it takes more work. You don't have to believe any of us on what we say. You shouldn't. Go do your homework.
We're going to have a time problem pretty soon. I'd like to get to some of the questions of people who've been on the feed, ask you to ask brief questions, and I'll try to produce brief answers.
This is a question that has been alluded to by...
Closer to the microphone, please.
This is a question that's been alluded to by several of the panelists, but I think if Mr. Rosenfeld could address it. I'd like to know why the press as a whole has not been as tenacious in following this Kennedy assassination story as they have been in other stories, and why they're still afraid to print, for example, Mark Lane's books and articles.
Okay, I'm sorry, you didn't identify yourself, and that's one of our ground rules. Can you tell us
Okay, my name is Elise, and I'm a graduate student here.
Okay.
Fair criticism of the press for not dogging this story over the years. Some writers have, book writers. Dan Mulday is certainly one of them. Perhaps others whom we could name. The movie, it is a reproach to the press that it took a movie to blast us all into action again on this. I suppose we didn't do as well as we should, and we ought to be more attentive. I hope, in fact, I'm confident that you will find no conspiracy in this and just routine laggardness.
Another part of the question is why Mark Lane's writings are not given more attention.
Gee, I thought he was a pretty important figure in the discussion. I'm not a great expert. Others can advise. We all know his name, don't we? His views are a familiar part of the discussion.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Pamela Dieters, and I'm a voter, and I am very nervous. I am extremely nervous up here, but I think this is important. What I want to know is, I listened to the Diane Rehm show, and I heard John Judge and Fletcher Prouty on there, and you were talking about a high cabal. What are we talking about here? I want some information. I want to know some specifics.
I think let me repeat the question because some people couldn't hear it. The question said that she heard the two of you, Colonel Prouty and Mr. Judge, on a radio program here in Washington, and that you were talking about, I think she used the term high cabal, and she would like you to define this more specifically, and I would add briefly.
Well, one way to try to do that, if it isn't already known, I was at the Cairo conference in 1943 where Churchill, Roosevelt, and Chiang Kai-shek met. I was at the Tehran conference a few days after that where Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin met. Well, between Cairo and Tehran, I flew the plane that flew the Chinese to that delegation. But you never hear in any book, any history book, any paper, any magazine that I know of, that Chiang Kai-shek was at Tehran. I met Elliott Roosevelt en route there. And years later, I read a book by the man that has a job equivalent to Chief Justice of the United States, Lord Denning in England. And he was speaking of the time of World War II and how his friend Winston Churchill would from time to time refer to a high cabal. And Denning's view was, my God, in the middle of World War II, in his position, if there's a cabal higher than Churchill and Roosevelt, Stalin and Chiang Kai-shek, it's a high cabal. But now, if you hear Churchill saying that, I think you begin to see what the whole story is. I noted among the Chinese that I flew to Tehran were people who were working for TV Sung, a Chinaman, the wealthiest man in the world at the time. And his wife was married to Chiang Kai-shek. And his wife went to the conference. She isn't elected or head of state or anything like that. Averell Harriman was in Moscow. And we all heard what Averell Harriman had to say about World War II and also about the Vietnam War. There's a high cabal, and we've got to learn it and understand it. And it tells people how to do things, when to do them. It exists.
Do you mean by that moneyed interests of like mind, or do you mean something on the order of, something as fantastic as, a group of men plotting the domination of the world in just those terms?
My boss, Krulak, wrote a book in which he states that in pursuit of his assigned duties, he was working on a strategy for the Marines. He was the chief Marine of the Pacific at that time in Vietnam. His strategic plan was approved by the Commandant, first of all by CSPAN2 in the Pacific, Admiral Sharp, then approved by the Commandant of the Marine Corps, then approved by McNamara. And McNamara said, but just a minute, before you go to the White House, I want you to talk with Averell Harriman. He phoned Averell Harriman. Krulak got invited to lunch. He briefed his whole plan, which had been approved by all the military from Westmoreland on up to McNamara. And Harriman said, General, there's no way we can do that. So the general went back to Hawaii. He got a call after he arrived there from General Greene, Commandant of the Marine Corps, and he said, I have arranged for you to meet with Lyndon Johnson. Flew back, went to see Lyndon Johnson. And here is a strategic military plan for forces in Vietnam. Remember, it was the Marines that landed there first in 1965. So he was responsible for the Marines operating on it. Told the whole story to Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson said, no, we can't do that. So I went back to Hawaii. Admiral Sharp, who was CSPAN2 in Hawaii at the time, in other words, nominally in charge of all forces in the Pacific, has written a book you all like to read called Strategy for Defeat. Now, the military men didn't write that strategy. I grew up with General Abrams from my hometown, the first man I reported to before Pearl Harbor when I came on duty, the greatest battle commander in World War II under Patton. He was head of the brigade under Patton, and later on, as you know, he was chief of all forces in Vietnam. When he was briefed by Johnson and told to go to Vietnam, he said, General Lee said, you have 550,000 Army troops out there. You've got the best Navy in the 7th Fleet, and you've got an Air Force that's dropping more bombs than we dropped in World War II. Go out there and do it. And General Abrams, Mr. President, may I ask your definition of that last word? Go out and do it. What is it you were expecting the military to do? And you got no answer at all. Now, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, because if the generals weren't running it, and if Dean Rusk wasn't running it, and if McNamara wasn't running it, think.
I think that history shows us over a long time that there are concentrations of wealth and power, first by theft, and then later when we have the machinery to create wealth by other design, and concentration of control over resources and over the politics of situations. If it's worth $10 million for the CIA to throw over a government in a country like Chile, then what do you think the elections are worth here in the United States, where things reside at the level that the world can be controlled? And so I think that there isn't one. I don't think you have to think of conspiracy as a certain group of individuals, a team of 5 that sit in a boardroom and call the shots. More likely, as in all human affairs, there are many cabals, and they compete with one another, and they jockey for positions of power, and they kill one another. And I think that Kennedy got in the way of one that was particularly powerful at a particular time. He had his own. But these concentrations of wealth and power operate at a level beyond what's up there. And with apologies to Senator Gonzalez, I think that Bill Moyer's idea is exactly reversed in the secret government. He says that the government, Congress, make a mistake by going out and hiring these mafia goons and gun runners and drug carriers, and they shouldn't sully themselves with that, and they should stick to more honorable men. I think that those gun runners and opium dealers are the real government of the United States, and they're clandestine intelligence operatives, and that they in turn pay many people in 3-piece suits to stand up in front of us and tell us it's the other way around.
Next question.
My name is Paul Ruther, and I'm here in my capacity as a tax-paying citizen and voter. I have a brief statement about the movie and the media's reaction to it, and a question. I was distressed particularly by the media, and of course my own local paper, the Washington Post, treatment of the movie. The movie is called a myth. It brings untruths to the general public. The government created the myth that Oswald killed the president, then the Warren Commission is the documentation of that myth, and the Washington Post and other media sources put the myth out. Oliver Stone presents one myth, the government and the Post present another. I fail to see that great of a distinction, except one is art and one is called journalism. My question is this.
Which is which?
As a voter, that's a good question. As a voter, it seems to me the least I can do is vote for someone who wasn't director of the CIA in the next elections. However, I did hear Mark Lane on the Diane Rehm show say that George Bush was not only director of the CIA, but that as far back as 1963 and even beyond, he was a member of the CIA. I would like to ask any of the panelists to confirm what Mark Lane said based on what they know, and be specific, please.
Anyone here have a confirmation that George Bush worked for the CIA before he was director of the CIA?
I never heard that charged, and wasn't a
Village Voice.
junk.
It's based essentially on three pieces of evidence so far that I've seen, 2 of them being internal intelligence documents. One was an FBI memo that concerned a debriefing by an FBI agent of a Navy intelligence person in a George Herbert Walker Bush at the particular address where he lived in Texas. And this debriefing was the day after the Kennedy assassination, and seemed to concern the anti-Castro Cuban community in Miami and what their reactions would be. There was another document that talked about a George Bush of the CIA and his relationship to turning in another person, I believe it was, a guy named Parrott, who was with Young Americans for Freedom and the Young Republicans at the time. But there's some intelligence documents. And then the third area is the relation between the Bay of Pigs operation, potentially in Bush, in that the code name of the Bay of Pigs was Operation Zapata, which is the name of Bush's oil company, and two of the ships used in the raid were the Houston, where he lived, and the Barbara, who he married. And I think we have other indications. The key is try to get Felix Rodriguez to tell you when he met George Bush, and you'll get the answer.
Next question.
Yeah, my name is Bill Barada. I'm from Arlington, Virginia, and unlike E. Howard
I have to ask you to get a little closer to the mic.
Okay, I am from Arlington, Virginia, and unlike E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, I remember where I was on November 22nd, 1963. And I've got 1,000 questions I'd like to ask one of them.
Can you just give us one?
Okay, all right. Colonel Prouty, you say that you think that the security in Dallas that day was less than adequate or less than normal, I believe. Don't you think it's particularly inadequate in light of the fact that on November 9th of 1963, the Miami police recorded a conversation with a man named Joseph Miltier, I believe, wherein he described the fact that an assassination was in the works, or his word was actually in the working, I've heard the tape. And he also described that the president would be shot from an office building with a high-powered rifle, and that some nut would be picked up to throw people off. And one other thing, I can't remember it all, but there's just so much. I mean, if you need any further proof of a conspiracy, wouldn't that be it? And why wasn't the Warren Commission told about this? I mean, the President Kennedy's appeared on November 18th in Miami, 4 days before he was assassinated, and 11 days after this tape was made. And his motorcade was changed. He took a helicopter to speak to the anti-Castro Cuban community. But his motorcade in Dallas was not certainly changed, and certainly the security wasn't beefed up. Could somebody comment on that for us, please?
Somebody want to comment on the conversation taped in Miami? And
Yeah, the acoustics are horrible. Have you got an idea?
well, yes. The gentleman was referring to a conversation that was taped in Miami, I believe on November 9th, 1963, in which somebody said that the president was going to be assassinated. Joseph Miltier. He appeared for us. Sir, it's only going to be worse without the microphone, so I'll try to represent it as best I can. And the gentleman suggests that this is further evidence of a conspiracy, or part of the conspiracy, and wonders whether anybody wants to comment on that point.
I think there were several plans against Kennedy. In Miami, another one at the time of the Army-Navy game in October that was pulled back at the last minute when he had a cold. There were several points. Miltier, working with the far right wing, I think was privy to some of the details. But and there were different points. I think when you do this, you do it with several backup operations. I think that there's evidence that there were guns further down Stemmons Freeway if the Elm Street location had not been a go. But as Mr. X says in the movie, you leave nothing to chance.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Michael Weintraub, and I'm a freshman in the School of Public Affairs, and I feel that this Oliver Stone's movie provides a pretty valid argument for conspiracy, but the whole basis of that is whether or not it's a true movie or if it's just fiction. And I would like to ask Colonel Prouty if his part in the movie as X is true or not, or if it was fiction made up by Stone.
Colonel Prouty, the question is, the gentleman says that he believes the movie is convincing, but he wants to know whether it's truth or fiction, and he wants to know whether the part portraying you as X is true or not, or Oliver Stone's fiction.
I'll explain to you how
Please.
that was created, because the words, the theme, the thoughts, the whole idea was in letters, not in a personal visit. I happen to have the letters with me. Jim Garrison had sent me the manuscript to his book, On the Trail of the Assassin. I read the manuscript, Immediately wrote back to Jim, and that started, and I had known him before this, and this started an exchange of letters. Zach Sklar, the screenwriter, used the letters and the book in the development of the script. In addition, I had written a series of articles during the 80s about Vietnam, but elaborating very much on Kennedy and the Kennedy assassination and all that sort of thing. Oliver Stone heard about him and asked the editor of the magazine that appeared in for copies of all the magazine. He was sent the copies. So Oliver Stone picked up material from magazine work that I wrote. The script is putting those together, and we wanted to bring the cameras to Washington because it wouldn't be right to make a film John F. Kennedy without having Washington in it. So the scene between Costner and Sutherland is the screenwriters or directors putting together material that I can show you. There's been written, some of it, for years. And I don't think any changes that would affect its veracity, except the fact they were sitting down by the Vietnam Memorial instead of exchanging letters with each other. It's a true story, except for where they met.
The Vietnam Memorial, of course, didn't exist at that time.
Pardon?
The Vietnam Memorial, of course, didn't exist at that time.
Well, it certainly did. They were filming the picture in 1991.
Right.
And
Just curious, Mr. Prouty, does it disturb you at all that Jim Garrison was a shill for the local mafia in New Orleans? Does that disturb you at all? That he was accepting money from them and everything else? Does that bother you at all?
That Garrison?
That Garrison was accepting, that he was a shill for the New Orleans mafia, that he was accepting money from the Marcello organization. Does that disturb you at all? And that he is the hero of this film? And that none of this is pointed out at any point in this film?
I can see that for some people here, it needs kind of a basic explanation. When you look at the hundreds of books that are available on the subject of the assassination of the president, you try to get one that will bring to the public a pretty wide view of the folklore that has developed, so the public will start off on a level ground with people who have called themselves experts in this field. One of the latest books was Mark's book called Crossfire. Stone acquired rights to that book. And another of the latest books was Garrison's book On the Trail of the Assassin. Using those two books, he was able to present to the public this stuff we've been hearing all night here and a lot more about everything, you know, the autopsy reports and all the other things. I mean, notice, remember the movie begins with this woman being thrown out of the car and things like that. They're all in the books. The advantage of using Garrison's book was that his words and everything he did is in a court transcript. So there's not much questioning it unless you want to go back to the court transcript and match it with his book. So it was as good a base to start with to bring the public into the film without too much comment about what it was, because it was just the folklore. It could have been 50 other books. He did use many other books, but primarily those two.
But Colonel Prouty, just to press Dan Molday's question, Mr. Molday says that Jim Garrison was accepting money from mafia figures in New Orleans, and that Jim Garrison's credibility is compromised on the basis of his associations with organized crime figures. And he is asking you whether that bothers you.
Well, that's what he said. If you want to believe it, that's what
the
he
evidence
said.
is clear. I mean, he was caught with the marked money that the IRS Criminal Intelligence Division put out. I mean, he was caught with the marked money. I mean, the evidence is clear on this, and once again, this is an indication of the lack of integrity that this entire film has, where this material is not dealt with at all in the film, that the principal suspects in this murder, at least according to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Carlos Marcello, now turns out to have been the person who owned Jim Garrison, who had him on his payroll. I think that should be of some significance to the people who are actually starting to believe this paranoid paradise which Oliver Stone has put out.
Next question.
I'm Michael Schwartz, and I'm playing hooky from work to be here tonight. Mr. Prouty, Mr. X in the movie talks about the overthrow of the democratically elected government of Guatemala. Were you present at the meeting where they planned to overthrow Arbenz, which led to one of the worst genocides. And one other thing, Mr. Gonzalez, will you continue your attempt to impeach Bush? And John Judge, can you comment on the bubble top? Who gave the order to remove it? Would it have been bulletproof, the bubble top on the car?
Okay, 3 questions. Colonel Prouty, were you present at the meeting where there was the plot was hatched to assassinate President Arbenz of Guatemala? Congressman Gonzalez, will you continue to, I'm sorry, I'm losing that question. Continue to
Impeach George Bush.
press the move to impeach George Bush. And John Judge about the bubble top. I'd like to try and get some quick answers.
Mr. Prouty, I want details if you have them.
Come to the reception.
We're going to take one more question after this one, and I'd like to get some quick answers, please, because we're well over our time. Colonel Prouty.
As I explained, my years in the Pentagon began in 1955. Guatemala was prior to 1955. In 1954, I was in and out of Vietnam, flying with the U.S. Air Force, transport aircraft out of Tokyo and into Southeast Asia. I did not have anything to do with Guatemala.
Anything else? Any other meetings to plan murders or assassinations? You said you discuss it with whoever wants to know. I want to know.
Can you get anything out of it?
Yes, the gentleman wants to know if, about other meetings, any meetings you attended where assassinations were discussed. He wants specifics.
The assassination of whom?
Of anyone.
Anybody.
The assassination of anyone.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you.
He's not going to tell
I
you.
know about it, but I'm not going to tell you.
But before you said you'd tell us.
I'm sorry?
Before he said that he'd discuss it with whomever wants to know.
The gentleman says, earlier you said you would discuss it with anyone who wants details.
I want everybody to know, and I want to know.
Trujillo.
Who?
Trujillo.
Okay,
The
thank
name
you.
of the public.
That's enough.
Well, Mr. Schwartz, I did introduce that resolution on January the 15th of 91, and after considerable thought, I had been since August attempting to get the leadership to address the question of the president's supra-constitutional actions. And on the basis of that resolution, I was hoping I could get some attention, but then the shooting started 12 hours later, and I wasn't about to get any cosigner on that resolution, which I still haven't. However, it's consistent with what I have said and done since Lyndon Johnson. I question the president's constitutional authority to conscript an unwilling American and send him outside of continental United States without a declaration of war. That upset some of the, as far as it's possible at this time, I think the question of impeachment would be moot as far as getting any action. All I wanted was to have a hearing before the committee, and I never did get it.
And Mr. Judge, the bubble top?
The decision to remove the bubble top from the car, as well as to change the route of the motorcade, happened at a private oil club. We don't know which one, but we have reason to believe it was Connolly's club, one that he attended. There were present an FBI agent unnamed in the record, a Secret Service agent by the name of Harold Wong, and 2 people from the advanced public relations firm, Saul Bloom Agency, where Oswald did some of his photographic work, where he worked at Jagger Charles Stovall, because they had better blow-up and reduction equipment over at the ad agency than the contractor did. Their names were Jack Puterbaugh and Elizabeth Forsling. She later married Leon Harris, the guy that ran the department stores there in Dallas and big money. She was referred to in those years as a Dallas contact by the Washington intelligence community. She later co-founded Ms. Magazine with another CIA agent by the name of Gloria Steinem. It's not an attack on feminism on my part. I believe in radical feminism, but people have histories and should be looked at. And she was the one that specifically brought up leaving the bubble top off the car. There was a conversation between that Prouty mentioned on the radio between LBJ and Hoover, where Hoover said the bubble top wouldn't have made any difference. But I think anything that would have deflected a shot would have had a significance to a gunman.
What about the popular story about JFK ordering the removal because he wanted to be a popular president in close touch with the people? Is that, do you know anything about that?
Congressman Gonzalez, you were there. Do you have anything
Well,
to add?
yes, I think we ought to understand something here, Mr. Judge. I happened to be there the morning after the breakfast at the hotel in Fort Worth. It had been raining. When we took our place to leave the hotel to go back to Carswell Air Force Base, where we were going to fly 10 minutes over to Love Field, the presidential car was right in front of us. To my surprise, the sun came out, and I noticed, and I commented to those that were with me, look at this. And I noticed a bubble top emerging up, pulling back like a convertible car. So I don't know that it was removed. I think it was a type of car that had the capability. The reason you didn't have the bubble top was because the weather was no longer inclement by the time the parade in Dallas. However, there was one thing that was unusual. I've never been in any kind of a parade of that kind where the average speed was no less than 30 miles an hour down the main street in Dallas. It was very unusual. But I don't think we should consider that the bubble top was removed because it was some sinister. I think it was part of the fact that it wasn't raining any longer. Had it been raining, the bubble top would have been there.
That is what is called a disarmingly simple explanation, Congressman.
Those of us that worked in protection,
That makes Elizabeth Forsling Harris a weather
knew
woman.
that the Secret Service did not have a bubble top that was effectively stop bullets, nor did they have one single armored car. FBI had them, not Secret Service, in 1963. We knew that in the Pentagon.
Next question.
My name is Cynthia Johnson. I work with Women's Strike for Peace here in Washington, D.C. I wonder if anyone here can comment on the connection between the CNS, the Committee for National Security, the American Bar Association, the Institute of Peace, and the ABA, the American Bar Association. I've heard there are some connections. And as Pat Dowell so aptly said, we are concerned with our government now, and I really, this is a very sincere question. I hope you won't take it as naive. But right now, in the last months, I've been very concerned about, well, one of the cover stories, and since we're dealing with secrecy and democracy in government, our hope for democracy, right now in Washington, or in the last days in Washington, the OAS, with our executive branch, has been negotiating for the constitutional return of the president of Haiti. Now, most Haitian people believe that this is a sham because our government is not, that the U.S. ambassador in Haiti is the person who is running that country. Now, he is an alumnus of the Phoenix program in Vietnam, and I very sincerely want to ask people like Colonel Prouty and Congressman Gonzalez and Mr. Judge, how can it happen, if this is at all true? How does a U.S. ambassador, what kind of activities are going on that even a people in a sovereign country can believe that their country is being run by the U.S. ambassador, and that negotiations that our executive branch is supporting for democracy are just a sham?
I'll try to allow some brief comments on it. I think the question is a little bit far from our subject.
It isn't, because we're talking about the 1963 and covert activities.
Yes, I understand, but you're standing there and I'm sitting here, and we have to try and bring the program to a conclusion. I'm sorry. Does somebody have something to say about the negotiations relating to the return of President Aristide to Haiti, or Haiti being run by the American ambassador? And I'm sorry, I didn't catch the thing about the American Bar Association. Maybe at the reception afterwards, we could deal with some of those questions. I'm going to take one last question.
I'm Sarah Cutler, and I'm an educator. And I'm an educator, and I've been following the supra-constitutional, the process of going to war. And when the president said he didn't have to go to Congress for this last war, I've been following the legal advice, and I've been reading the articles in the various newspapers and contacting those lawyers, which led me to the American Bar Association Committee for National Security, which is very small. And it was started by somebody on the Committee on the Present Danger, which was originally started by an admiral in 1950. Then I heard about the committee again in 1974, but I didn't hear anything about that committee in the 60s. I expressed, at the ABA meetings, I found out about the U.S. Institute of Peace because some of those people were there, which brought me to their meetings. And there is an interlocking board between those three groups.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And there is...
I really don't want to cut you off, but this is well beyond the subject of our forum tonight. and I'll have to ask you to discuss this with the panelists at the reception afterwards, if you want to do it. I think that we have held on to a very loyal, committed, devoted audience, and I appreciate all of you for being here. I'm sorry we can't get to all the questions. There is a reception on the first floor of Mary Graydon Center. Before we go there, let me say a couple things with such a large audience in the hall. We will have additional forums in the American Forum series on Tuesday, February 11th, Monday, March 2nd, and Wednesday, April 1st in this room. If you would like to be on our mailing list, there are cards outside the doors so that you can get on the mailing list and be informed about the forums. I want to thank, once again, the people who have made these forums possible, the Xerox Foundation, the Washington Gas Light Company, the Xerox Foundation, the Washington Gas Light Company, Cable Holdings, and the Evelyn Y. Davis Foundation. And I want to thank Fletcher Prouty, Stephen Rosenfeld, Pat Dowell, Henry Gonzalez, John Judge, and Dan Mulday for being with us. Thank you.
For more information on this American Forum, you can write to the American University School of Communication at 4400 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest, here in Washington, D.C. The zip code is 20016. Or for a transcript of this event, send $10 to C-SPAN Transcripts in care of Tapewriter Incorporated, Post Office Box 885 in Lincolnshire, Illinois. The zip code is 60069.
I'd like to.
Good. Please do.
Is it in this building?